Sadducees. Well, not long after that, the Pharisees, which had a powerful school for rabbis, they incited a revolt that would turn into a 6-year-long civil war. During that civil war, 50,000 Jews were killed. Alexander Janus then died in 76 BC and left his kingdom to his wife, Queen Salome of Alexandria. What you're going to see happens, if you remember, it is said that Solomon's temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred between the Jews. They say the temple in Rome was destroyed because of baseless hatred toward one another. And the whole civil war that they had is what led Herod the Great to take over. They invited Rome to come to solve their problems. This is why Paul says, don't go to the court, solve your problems yourself. When you go invite someone else in, you're causing big problems for everybody. Well, as I said, Salome Alexandra had 2 sons, John Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II, and they were fighting over who was going to have the key positions. And so the way they resolved this, John Hyrcanus had Alexandra, this nice lady, and Aristobulus had Antigonus, and he's the one who chased Herod away to Rome, but then Herod came back. Well, they also had Alexander. And how do you solve problems? Marry between the families. So Alexander and Alexandra got married. And they had Miriam the first. So she is also one of the Maccabees, and she also marries Herod the Great. And Alexandra and Alexander also had kids, Aristobulus III, and so Miriam the first and Aristobulus III are brother and sister. Now, Miriam with Herod had kids, Alexander and Aristobulus IV. But what happens one day, Herod the Great, I'll tell you the story in a little bit, kills his wife and her kids. And I will tell you why shortly. Okay. Miriam was revolted by her husband's heartless murder of most of the members of her family in order to satisfy his selfish ambitions. And she was one of these independent women that let him know. And yet, despite this, Herod was madly in love with his wife, too madly in love, but it did not stop Herod from carrying out his ugly schemes. Herod did not want anyone telling him what to do. Well, Miriam, her brother is Aristobulus III. What does Herod do? He appoints a non-Levite, unimportant person to become the high priest. Oh, no. Okay, so Alexandra, right here, the mother of these two, wants her son to be high priest. And Herod isn't complying. So what does she do with all of her wisdom? She goes to Cleopatra of Egypt, who's very powerful queen, and she goes to Mark Antony, the ruler of Rome, to intervene with Herod on her son's behalf. That did not make Herod happy. Despite of all of Alexandra's efforts, it was Miriam who persuaded Herod to depose the other man and appoint Aristobulus to be the high priest. Herod does what she says, and then he has him killed and drowned and made it look like an accident. So he complied, and then he killed the guy. All right. What had happened was there was a festival held in Jericho, and he hired some young men to keep the high priest underwater while he was bathing until he drowned, and then have it appear as an accident. Herod appeared to be so sorry, but everyone knew it was his fault. Well, Alexandra had even succeeded in having Herod called before a Roman court to answer for the crime. But what does he do while he's in Rome? Through bribery, he ends up escaping blame and punishment and comes back. Well, guess what? Before Herod left for Rome, after Alexandra did that to him, he arranged with his sister's husband. Okay, here's Herod. His sister is Salome, who's married to a man named Joseph. And Joseph, that if Herod was proven guilty in Rome and was going to be killed and not return, Joseph was to kill Miriam and all of her children. Because if anything happened to Herod, he didn't want anyone else to get his lovely wife, Miriam. But here was the problem. Joseph really, really liked Miriam. So he goes and tells her what her husband's planning to do to kill her if he dies. Well, that did not make Miriam any more happy about Herod. And so she gave him the what for when Herod came back. He said, Joseph told me that you wanted me killed if you were killed. And sometimes you should keep your mouth shut, maybe better off. But she's just blasting into him. Well, so what happened, Joseph's admiration for Miriam made Herod's sister Salome very jealous. And so Salome tells Herod that her husband Joseph has a thing for his wife Miriam. Do you see how this is unfolding? Okay, well, he ordered his brother-in-law Joseph to be killed without even trying to find out if what she was saying was true. But his love for Miriam was too strong to punish her. The next time Herod had to go away, he left someone else in charge to guard and watch Miriam, and he was told to kill her and her children if he didn't come back. Well, Herod came back, and his sister again tried to make trouble for Miriam anyway, and this time Salome told Herod that Miriam was planning to poison him. And so in a mad rage, she was tried by the men of his tribunal, and even though she was innocent, they condemned her to death, and she died. All right, so you're kind of getting an idea here of all of these guys. Okay, so here we go. All of them were killed, and then Antipater II, who was Herod's firstborn, okay, you have him, but then you have Bernice and Aristobulus. Before he died, they had kids, and guess who they had? They had Herod Agrippa, the first of Acts 12, and they had a daughter named Herodias, and Herodias and Herod Agrippa were brothers and sisters, and Herodias ended up marrying Herod Antipas of Matthew, and they were married, and they had a child who was Salome II. And guess what? Salome II and her mother were the ones that wanted to kill John the Baptist. And Herod Agrippa had Herod Agrippa II. All right? So you following all that? And then Aristobulus III, who was brother to Miriam, also was murdered. And yeah, that we got, okay, now let me go back one again. Now, it was interesting that, again, Antipater II, he wanted to be king so much he was willing to kill his dad. Now, do you remember the story that they killed all of the babies, 2 years old and younger, right? So what did Joseph and Mary do? They went to Egypt. But let me explain how all of this happened. I know the exact day and date of Yeshua's birth. He was born on the first day of Sukkot in the Hebrew year 37:57 a.m., which means from creation, which on the Julian calendar was the fall of 4 BC going into the spring of 3 BC. We know he was born in Bethlehem in the fall of 4 BC. And then we know after a month, he went to the temple to be dedicated. Now we know that the wise men had not yet come a month later. How do we know? What in Leviticus, if they had a son, what was the offering they were to make? After 30 days, he's no longer, unclean. They go, they dedicate the child. What offering was she supposed to bring? A lamb, and then a pigeon or a turtle dove. But it says if they were so poor they couldn't afford a lamb, then they could bring the 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons. And Joseph and Mary brought the 2 turtle doves and the 2 pigeons because they were so poor. But what happens, see, this is in like September, October, the last of Sukkot. It was the following month that the Magi came with all of the riches because they couldn't afford it, but they needed money. So God made sure they had money so they had money to support themselves in Egypt. That's why the wise men came. They're about to go into Egypt and they're going to need finances. And if they can't even afford a lamb, how are they going to support themselves in Egypt? So the wise men come the next month and then they get the funds. And then what happens? The wise men came who had seen the star, but the star actually had come 2 years earlier. They waited 2 years from seeing the star to go to Bethlehem to find the young child. And then we know they left a different way. It didn't tell Herod. And that's why Herod, wanted to have all the babies killed 2 years and younger. Now, here's my next quiz. How long were Mary and Joseph and baby Jesus in Egypt? How long do you think they were in Egypt? Any guesses? I don't hear anybody. It's okay to be wrong. 3 years? Yeah, I know. He was only there about 5 months. And I can prove it. I will show you. It's all in the Bible and science and history. Get a load of this. If you go to NASA's website, it lists all of the solar lunar eclipses for 5,000 years. And we find there was a lunar eclipse on March 13th of 3 BC, and it was seen all over Israel. Josephus records this event. Okay, now I'm going to give you another test. You can only have a total solar eclipse when? When can you have a total solar eclipse? There's only 1 day a month you can have a total solar eclipse. On the first day of the month. All of Israel's months are based on the sighting of the new moon. God tells Moses, look at this new moon here. This is the beginning, the first of the month. Okay? Now, when can you have a total lunar eclipse? Only 1 time a month. The full moon, which is on the 15th of the month. Right? Right in there. The middle of the month is the full moon. If this is a lunar eclipse, it tells you it's the middle of the month. Right? What is in the middle of the month of March? Purim. Purim. The very day the Amalekites wanted to kill all the Jews in the book of Esther. So here we see a total lunar eclipse seen in Israel on the festival of Purim while Joseph is still in Egypt with Mary and the baby. Okay? Well, Herod was like on his deathbed. And when all the Jews saw the lunar eclipse, they said, hooray, Herod's going to die. That's what this means. Herod's going to die, probably by Passover. Okay? So Herod, as you know, he's married to a Maccabee who celebrates Hanukkah all the time. And they celebrate Purim all the time. And in Purim, they make a mockery of the kings, okay, and Haman and Amalek. They all make a big party and a mockery. Herod knows how they keep Hanukkah. Herod knows how they keep Purim. And he's afraid, after all the celebrations of Purim and then having this, that their Jews are going to mock him and make a fool of him when he dies. And he thinks he's such a great king, everyone should mourn for him at his death. So he tells his troops on the day that he dies, they're to kill like 50,000 Jews so they mourn on his death. He does not want his death to be a day of rejoicing, but a day of mourning. So he tells the soldiers, go slaughter a whole bunch of Jews when the day I die, so they'll remember it as a day of mourning for me. Okay. Well, let's see. Another thing. Rome, right before Herod died, Rome had made a demand that Herod put their emblem of a big golden eagle on the entrance to the temple. Well, he complied and he did it. But the Jews didn't appreciate that. And so they tore it down and cut it into pieces. Okay? Well, if you look on your notes at Hosea 8, chapter 1, the Jews had read this verse, set the shofar to your mouth, he will come as an eagle against the house of the Lord because they've transgressed my covenant and trespassed against my law. So they saw this putting up of the eagle as kind of like a fulfillment of this verse, and they tear it down. Well, what does Herod do after they tear it down? He kills a whole bunch of people and he locks the top leaders of the Jews, the sages, up with a command that on the day he dies, they have to kill all of the sages. So they will mourn on the day of his death. Now, here's what Josephus says, who lived during that time. He said that Herod had no affection or goodwill towards his son, the Antipater II. And to restrain him, and so he put him in jail. And it says the jailer said that Herod Antipater wanted to kill Herod the Great. So Herod the Great cries out, he beats his head on the wall, and he raised himself on his elbow and told his guards and commanded them to go kill Antipater without any delay and then bury him in a horrible way. Well, Antipater had wanted to be king. Herod dies a month later in April, just before Passover. And upon his death, his son Archelaus becomes king, and everyone hope it's going to be better. Now, let me come back to here for a second. So here we had Herod Archelaus of Matthew 2:22. He kills this son from Doris, and he wants to put Malthace's son, Herod Archelaus, as king. Well, when he becomes king, all the Jews rejoice that Herod died, and they're hoping he's going to be a better king. And so they ask him to let go all of the sages in prison that were supposed to die when Herod died, and he just died. Well, what does he do? Instead, it's Passover. They're celebrating Passover, and he sent in armed troops and slaughtered 3,000 people in the temple area. He canceled Passover and sent everybody home. Now, look at Matthew 2:20 and 21. The Lord speaks to Joseph in Egypt, saying, arise and take the young child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for they are dead which sought the young child's life. He arose, took the young child and his mother, and came to the land of Israel. It says they, not he. There was more than one person that wanted this supposed Messiah dead. Who was it? It was Herod and his son Antipater, because he wanted to become king. He was the one searching for this Messiah to get him killed too. So when it says they, that's who it was referring to. But fortunately, Herod killed his own son, and then he died. And then in Matthew 2:22 and 23 on your notes, it says, when he had heard that Archelaus reigned in Judea in the room of his father Herod, he sure didn't want to go there. So being warned of God in a dream, he goes instead to the parts of Galilee, and he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which is spoken by the prophets, he be a Nazarene. So what I'm going to do is take a picture of this chart and have it on the table for you next week. So you can kind of follow along as you read the New Testament to know who's who in the Herod family. But what's amazing is, Yeshua was born like in October on Sukkot. November, the wise men come. December, he leaves to Egypt. And then what happens? January, February, March, this big eclipse comes. That's all recorded in history. And then a month later, right before Passover, Herod dies, Archelaus becomes king, and then Yeshua comes back because they had died who wanted to kill him, but he goes to Nazareth instead of Jerusalem because Archelaus is there as king. Does all that make sense now? Okay. Who wants to repeat it back for me? Let's stand and we'll close with prayer. I love history. There's something else I'll have to tell you about. Maybe next week I'll look into it. It's amazing. How many of you have heard about Petronius? Petronius is my hero. I'll have to tell you about him next week. Let's pray. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, we just thank you so much for everything you're doing in each one of our lives. We just pray that we will leave here changed, that not only will we have more knowledge, but we'll have more heart for you, that we would both be willing and able to do your good pleasure. Make us willing and able to do what you want each one of us to do. The main thing is to draw closer to you. So I just pray, Lord, right now that each one of us would draw closer to you. It's just so exciting that not only do you want to bless us, you want to put your name upon us, as you told Aaron to say, Ivarekaka Adonai v'ishmereka, Ya'er Adonai panavileka v'chuneka, Yisa Adonai panavilecha v'yasem laka shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you his peace in that most wonderful name. Asher, Amen. We'll see you next week.